Good morning and good evening. We are really gathered here today from Australia to over Israel to UK, and it's so joyous to welcome today the Editorial Collective for the special issue on the voice and influence of people with lived experience of social work for the British Journal of Social Work. And today we have with us Professor Peter Beresford from University of East Anglia and Shaping Our Lives. Welcome, Peter. Dr. Frank Golding, Vice President of the Care Leavers of Australasia Network, Dr. Mel Hughes, Associate Professor from Bournemouth University, Dr. Leah Levin, Senior Lecturer from Tel Aviv University, Omar Mohamed, who is a person with lived experience and a newly qualified social worker, and Dr. Peter Unwin, University of Worcester. Part of the collective, but unfortunately not here today, is Professor Ulla-Karin Schön from Stockholm University in Sweden as well. It's so good to see you all, and thank you so much for all the hard work over the past year putting together this issue, which is going to be published in May of 2023. To start our conversation, I have lots and lots of questions I would love to discuss with you, and I hope we keep this conversation going beyond today, is what was the inspiration for special issues? So Peter, because we have Peter B and Peter U, so Peter U, what was the inspiration for this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Rhea. I've been on the British Journal of Social Work editorial board for some time. I've also been an active member of BJSW, the British Association of Social Workers, who work hand in hand with the journal. And one of my big drivers in my practice of many years has been trying to better profile the voices of people with lived experience and respect their knowledge alongside that knowledge, the knowledge of practitioners and the knowledge of academics. There was some appetite for this on the journal, but when Mel Hughes from Bournemouth, who you've just introduced, joined a couple of years back, we were kind of strengthened. It was a strength in numbers job, really, and we'd thrown around this idea of how can we better profile the voice of lived experience, and we put forward this proposition that we should dedicate a whole issue to the voices of lived experience in various ways, and this was received with great enthusiasm by both BJSW and the British Journal. And they basically gave us the green light, despite this initiative being rather radical and out of, shall we say, the comfort zone of such a kind of formal, long established and respected academic journal. So it was quite challenging, but the environment we were kind of given to go ahead with whatever was most encouraging, and hopefully, as this meeting we're having today, we have kind of delivered the goods, but we'll talk a bit more about that as we go on.
Thank you so much. So how did the Editorial Collective come together? Well, do you want to?
Yeah, shall I go with this one? And Peter, yeah, thank you for the nod. And I think part of how this came together was just how incredibly supportive BJSW and BJSW have been to the idea. But I always think I've got the best job in the world, because in my kind of day-to-day job, I'm academic lead for the peer partnership, which is about public involvement in education and research, and part of the research centre of Seldom Heard Voices. So in that day-to-day role, I'm having conversations all the time about how we need to create space for lived experience expertise, and how do we do that. And we'd had lots of conversations about journals and formal knowledge, and about, so who is it that creates knowledge? And there has been focus on lived experience expertise, but it was often journal articles talking about involving people with lived experience expertise. And we were really keen to do something that was actually people themselves having the space to share their expertise and their insights. So when I joined the editorial board for British Journal of Social Work, shared that idea, and as Peter said, just got this incredibly positive response of absolutely yes, when should we do it? So we put together a proposal. I reached out to people I already knew, some of who are here. They reached out to people they knew, and through lots of different connections, we brought a collective together. We wrote a proposal, submitted that to the next editorial board, and as Peter said, not only got the green light, but actually we're really pushed to be even more bold and more ambitious than even we were proposing. So yeah, we call ourselves a collective because it was always about kind of pulling in different people to kind of share ideas, but very much on that kind of equal basis.
Omar.
Yeah, I also just wanted to come in on that around, so when I was kind of invited into the Editorial Collective, as a person with lived experience, I very much felt welcomed as an expert by experience. I think my knowledge was, and my experiences were immediately welcomed. And I think I felt like I was part of a team straight away. I felt like the collective were committed to the same passions and interests of myself, and I know of many other people with lived experience. And I think just kind of linking it back to that inspiration for the special issue, I think what really connected, I think, all of our passions is that need to kind of tackle those, those experiences of seldom voices and kind of that epistemic injustice and the want to explore perspectives from people with different experiences. And I think we took a very passionate approach that really values this expertise and learning. So it was a very much easy process for me to kind of join in with the Editorial Collective.
Thank you. Peter.
I just want to build on what both Omar and Mel have said. Excuse me. It's not just been about involving lived experience from people who are on the receiving end of social work. It's been an absolute equal important thing that we are inclusive and address diversity. And you'll hear more about how we've sought to do that and the outputs and the outcomes, but that's been critical. It's not just been, let's involve some people. That's been, I think, an historical error when people have gone on about involvement. And this issue of combining our concern with marginalized experiences and perspectives and making it possible for groups who've previously been denied en masse is absolutely at the heart of this.
And how important it is to have that perspective and really embrace those values, which the team certainly did. Leah.
Yes, just to echo what everyone else has said, but I think also beyond our motivations outwards, right, how to reshape the world and influence processes that are taking place, I think we each also had our individual motivations. And I can say that mine was really wanting to be part of something transformative and experience it hands-on, and also allow myself to be led by the voice of lived experience through what have become, the most basic routines of my work and things that I take for granted. And we'll probably discuss this more, but I think this experience has been very, very instructive for us on a personal level as well.
If I may come in too, from the colonies way down under. A couple of colleagues and I wrote a paper for the British Journal of Social Work, and it became the editor's choice on one particular occasion. And we had a very fruitful discussion with you, Ria. And then you put me in touch with Mel, and the rest is history, so to speak. Very warmly welcomed in. I'm an older person who grew up in care as a young child in Australia, and their voices have only recently begun to be heard through things like the Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse. So this is a wonderful opportunity to put another slant on it, if you like, because it's all been terribly, terribly horrible dealing with child sexual abuse. So this is a broad sweep thing, and I was really delighted to be involved in it, and I've been made most welcome.
So when you were thinking about what types of work to invite and how to organise the special issue, what have you decided and why was that decision made?
Shall I take that? I thought, well, we threw that around, obviously, because, as I say, this is unfamiliar territory for a journal such as the BJSW. But in having insight through our own work and interest into the realities of people with lived experience, we thought that only going for standard, £5,000 to £7,000 word academic articles, standard articles, would not be that inclusive. So we made the decision, took some soundings, obviously, and agreed to have a range of vehicles which would provide a platform for people with lived experience, ranging from academic articles, although we lowered the word count for them, or the minimum word count, reflective pieces. We were aware from our work that quite a number of people with lived experience who contribute to universities and organisations such as Shaping Our Lives were very reflective, shorter pieces, but from the heart pieces. And also we recognise the creativity in many of the people with whom we work, and created a section called Artifacts, which could be poems, paintings, song, sculptures, just different ways in which you might want to express something that's important to you and has some kind of resonance with social work values and the missions of BASRA and the BJSW.
And for all three of them, they are all led. So any submission was either solely authored or led by somebody who has lived experience of social.
Yeah, that was the key criteria, really, that we were aware that although there have been previous appearances of voice of people who lived experience in print, in formal journals, but often it might have been 3 or 4 professors and almost an also ran a person with lived experience. So we wanted to turn it on its head and give appropriate status, because it is important for people with lived experience. We academics trying to play it down, but it is important whose name is on the paper, and the lead voice, the lead author, if it were a co-produced piece, multi-produced piece, should always be the person with lived experience. And we did end up with a mixture of solo efforts, particularly in the artifacts criteria, but the majority were co-produced in some way or other, either between a group of people with lived experience, or between a practitioner and a person with lived experience, or academics, or a mix, academics, practitioners, and people with lived experience, which is probably ideal in terms of having equal respect for each other's perspectives and putting them all together to hopefully come out with a richer outcome.
Thank you. Mel?
Yeah, I was thinking it took me back. We were having a lot of discussions in this collective group at the beginning about what the criteria would be. So right from the offset, we agreed that the lead author would have to be somebody with lived experience, although they might be supported by somebody else. But we had a lot of discussions, because actually what we wanted to do was just remove all the barriers and say, submit whatever you want, so you would have a voice in whatever way you wanted to submit it. But the discussion was around, actually, if you offer no guidance, that's really daunting. And that's not necessarily then a safe space, particularly when you're inviting people into quite a formal academic world of a peer-reviewed journal. So that's why we started getting into trying to get that balance between offering really helpful guidance, but without being too prescriptive. And that led us to those 3 categories of academic papers, reflective papers, and the creative artifacts was almost and any other kind of means by which you would like to share your insights and your expertise. But it didn't just happen by chance. That took quite a lot of discussion for us to feel that we got that balance and the wording of the call around those categories right.
Thank you. Peter?
I want to go back to something that the other Peter said, almost as a throwaway, which is the radical nature of this venture, because it's been about breaking down every kind of assumption, not to stay with very traditional and powerful assumptions about what academic writing is, or how you communicate, or whose knowledge matters. And I think that we shouldn't understate the revolutionary and radical nature of this, but we should make clear that so far, I mean, it's for me a big lesson, and we haven't got there yet. It is doable, and you can do it properly. But I do think you need to try and do it properly. That's important. And I think it's interesting, it's in social work that we've been making this kind of progress, because it would be a kind of dishonoring of social work and of the role of the practitioner if we didn't remind ourselves that the whole point of social work is to work in relationship with others, individuals, groups, communities, families, to form equal relationships which can enable helpful change. And that can be about change to do with supporting people's rights. And sometimes it has to be about change to do with restricting somebody's rights to support somebody else's. But it's all about developing a relationship. And that relationship is about inclusion, involvement, and equality. And I think we would be letting down our aspirations for social work if we weren't trying to mirror them in the production of our knowledge. And I think that's terribly important. And this thing about equal relationships for me is at the heart of it. And I would want to stress that this isn't a fairy story. We've actually managed to work in a really positive way with each other, with our different identities and experience, possibly because we have in our process tried to be committed to the aspirations for the journal special issue.
Is there anything that you want to change? If you were kind of starting from scratch at this point, now that the issue is completed, is there anything that you would do differently? Would there be another category? Wouldn't one of the existing 3 categories be reshaped or have additional guidance? Omar, you wanted to add something, I think, around previous discussion and then now.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of links to change. I think something that we did that I think, was quite radical and enabled change. And I think maybe to flip the question on saying maybe this should be a change, I think for everyone going forward is, I think, bringing it back to the academic papers category. So one of the key approaches around this was to add, is that each article was reviewed by an academic, but also by a person with lived experience. And I think another key thing to add is that each submitting author was given support and encouragement and that kind of constructive criticism when needing revisions. And, this came through our collective. We were passionate about this, but we also saw that coming through the reviewers, and it was kind of, we could see a change. We could see how, reviewers were able to follow our passion and really put social work values at the forefront. And it really showed how support can enable an academic and a rigorous article, but where lived experience is at the forefront. And I think we really saw that balance where it came together. And I think that was a really beautiful, radical change that we hope to see, continuing going forward.
Yeah. The thing I keep going back and reflecting on is another conversation we've had a bit about who we reached. So who contributed to the journal and who was selected to be in it. And I'm really proud of the diverse range, the number of different countries that contributors come from, different types of expertise, different types of experience and so on. But we know, looking at who's been selected, the kind of degrees of separation from the journal or from this collective, in that people that had the confidence to contribute were often either known to us or known to people known to us, or at least sort of only 2 or 3 steps away through our networks, because it took that kind of personal connection or encouragement to encourage people to submit and support people to submit. And we've all been approached by people going, oh, if I'd known, I'd have loved to have submitted to that. When will there be another one? So when I kind of think, oh, would we have done anything differently? I wonder, with hindsight, if we could have spent more time really getting the word out and doing more of that pre-work to get more people to a point. And I don't mean that as any disrespect to the range that we have got, because I'm really proud of that. But there's more work there to be done, I think, in terms of getting people to a point where they feel they heard about it and they feel confident to contribute and submit to it.
Just before I come to Leah, on a related note, does it take that time for people to kind of, who have some degree of familiarity with people involved and with the process, and that there is a degree of trust in that process, to get the first issue out, to see the impact of it and to see the range, to have that, oh, I wish I knew, I wish I submitted, to then kind of broaden the scope, come back to this idea, or to make it a regular feature within the journal so that it opens up and holds the space for people going forward into the future? It's a question for everyone, I think. There is a lot of nodding heads around our circle. Frank?
If I may say, there's a certain amount of disbelief that the journal was serious initially. People just couldn't believe that a serious publication would be interested in their writing or their thoughts or their creative work. And it took quite some time in discussions in Australia, I'm sure that's true elsewhere, for people to say, yeah, they are serious and they really would like you to make a submission, and I know you can do it. It's partly also that sense of I'm not up to it. You know, I couldn't possibly write a piece of quality that the journal would want. And so it takes time for those processes to go through. Regrets, yes, in Australia, Indigenous writers are beginning to assert their voice, but we weren't able to find anyone at this point who would do that. Refugees, asylum seekers in Australia who are given a very bad time. There are some brilliant people there and love to have included them. So yes, a second opportunity or further opportunities would be absolutely welcomed.
And it's important to hold that space and to have that acknowledgement. Why people don't see themselves. In academia, there are many people who feel like they're imposters and that they might not belong in the academia. And you know, what is the learning for our profession from people feeling this is not their space, when it's all about their experience and it's focused about supporting people to have a voice, to have influence in their lives and to have agency in their lives. So there are some really important lessons there to unpack, not just for the journal, but for our profession, and to hold that space for the profession at large.
I think there's a message.
Leah wanted also to come in a little while ago. Sorry,
Leah.
Mel and Frank basically said what I was going to say.
Okay.
But I can add to that. I think that part of what made this process accessible is that we also reflected through different stages that we were also willing to change. It was not only, this is our platform, this is what you can submit, and you either play by our rules or you don't, or you and that is what will decide whether you're heard or not. I think that the different categories were really important in this aspect. I think they enabled experiences. We saw Peter B, right, in our category, people who had never before written about their experience. Some of them had never shared it publicly, and to be able to express themselves in the way they chose, I think was a strong catalyst for this. And in terms of international diversity, I agree that there is still a long way to go, but I think that also helped with the diversity that we do have, because to be able to submit a piece of music, a sheet of music, or a painting, or your thoughts is so different than these are the rules of academic writing. You either have to walk all the way to get there to be heard, or you can't be part of this. And I also get all the time, also from communities that sadly did not contribute, the same question: when will the next one be published? So that's maybe an invitation for others. And a question that I receive often is, will the next project have the same volume, have the same categories? So I think that's also some feedback that we get back from the field, that in these aspects, our choices were good choices, I think.
Thank you. Peter, Unwin first, and then Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that many of us who have written for some time know that sometimes it's still a big challenge for us to put an academic paper in, particularly to a journal we haven't written to before. And we've all had experience of very officious responses from editors. I recently had a PhD student who got the most rudest answer back from her and really deflated her. We have, of course, picked her up and resubmitted the journal somewhere else, but that style of editors being negative, only, you know, the red pen approach to, if we still use pens these days, we deliberately tried to be constructive and kind. We didn't want to add to anybody's trauma, because lots of the people writing to us clearly evidenced and who artifact trauma. So we didn't want to be part of adding to that, but equally we had to find this balance between standards that it had to have a beginning and end, it had to flow, it had to be related to social work in some way or other. We couldn't just accept anything. And I think we had 140, much bigger response than we thought, because at the outset, one of our worries was, well, what if we don't get enough for her? We don't get enough for an issue. In the end, it went the other way. We ended up accepting something like 80 submissions altogether. But it has made us think about that, and there's a message there for the academic editors. And I think just one other point I'd make, it also made us think about whose knowledge is this as editors. We shouldn't be tweaking and, well, that's not quite right and everything. These are other people's narratives, not mine or Ria's or Mel's. We have to respect that and not tamper, as it were, with their version of the truth, because part of what we're doing in so promoting the voice of lived experience is trying to get to other people's truths, not Basra's truth, not my truth, and between us, as I say, have a richer knowledge. And a third point, I will stop then, Rhea. It made us think about what do we mean by social work, and I was a bit dubious about some pieces. Would they resonate with a social work audience? But in other countries, for example, residential care is very much part of social work. In the UK, and we have a very balanced international board, but from my experience has been the UK. And I'm thinking, well, this isn't going to fit with the bit. But of course, when you take that broader perspective, it is very much at the heart of social work. So it's made us think more internationally, I think. Obviously have an international about, what is social work and what's our UK-centric model, perhaps, those of us who are UK-based. And does that need to change as well? Well, it does. Okay, thank you.
Peter.
I just want to pick up on things that both Leah and Peter have said. What we had a massive response. I mean, we had a frightening response. We had much more work to do than we ever would have realized. Thank God there were all the others. But what I found fascinating, and Leah knows about this, is not just the diversity of the response we got to the call that we particularly were involved in, which was about people's reflections, but how many who said they wanted to do an article actually did it, and how many of those who did it then did articles which we wanted to include. And then picking up on what Peter has said, this issue of quality is really important. There are notions of what quality is. And I think we have helped begin to turn those on their heads. It isn't about diluting quality or lowering standards to let other people in. It's about redefining what we mean. And you cannot have quality without inclusion. You cannot have a part of the picture. Experts, researchers, practitioners can only tell part of the picture. And there's a big gap. And that gap comes from the diversity of service users. And that's why this is so important. And just one little thing, because I think there's a lot of practical merging with the big sort of theoretical things here. I think it's really important that we kept meeting, because we were constantly able to hear what was going on and adapt and change. Particularly, I think, for example, it's been mentioned by both Peter and Omar, the way that we tried to make sure that people who were sitting, as it were, as reviewers in judgment, were not acting in the old traditional ways, some of which I think some journals still think are the way you definitely should behave. Let's just show them and put them down as part of the process. So unenabling.
And it's an important lesson for professionals as well, because there is an assumption about how knowledge should be, who holds that knowledge, how it should be presented, and that this is the only definition of quality. So in terms of disrupting colonialism within the profession more broadly and understanding what social work is internationally, which voices contribute and make the quality of our knowledge is hugely important. And it's wonderful to hear that that is reflected in the work. On a more practical note, how often did you meet as a collective? Yeah, Mel.
Yeah, so every month as a collective, and we have done right from that initial pulling together and saying and kind of writing that proposal. We've continued to meet every month. We also then broke into 3 subgroups for the 3 categories, and so those subgroups would then meet in addition to that. So it's been that kind of big commitment of time, But I think you're right, Peter, it was that regular meeting that actually enabled us to sort of keep momentum going, but also keep that kind of reflexive process of adapting and changing. Because we were always talking, weren't we, about how we just felt like we'd ripped up the rule book and we were making it up as we went along. But there was something really exciting about that, but we needed to keep kind of sense checking all the way about, you know, are we doing this right? And I just wanted to pick up on the other point that Peter, you were making about kindness in the reviewing process. I remember us having a conversation about how we wanted our reviews to be really kind. We wanted to manage rejection really well, because actually, particularly when somebody is sharing their lived experience, for us to say, actually, we're not choosing that for the journal. We really wanted to get that right and redirect and signpost people. But actually, the biggest thing that I left with is we were saying, oh, we want it to be really kind and really constructive and really helpful in order to get high quality. And then we thought, why is that the exception? Why are we introducing that just for this special issue? Surely that's what we should be doing anyway, in order to get really high quality inputs. And it just really struck us that we were talking about that like it was this innovative idea, when actually it should be the basis, shouldn't it, of the review process in any setting.
And it's probably something that we should take on board as a whole journal and review how we communicate to people, because it really can be quite disheartening, as Peter Unwin mentioned. That feedback can really have a huge impact. So the learning from this issue really needs to embed across the whole journal. So you mentioned quite a few things that you found surprising while preparing and editing this issue, from the volume of response to who the people were who engaged with it, to importance of kindness and inclusivity, and redefining and rethinking together the quality. And is there anything else that we haven't mentioned so far that you found surprising while editing the issue?
I don't think really with the editing, really. I think with some of the systems, I think perhaps it was Mel or Peter who just said it was the first time anybody had ever submitted an article or written something. It was the first time some people had put an invoice in, because we haven't mentioned that in line with the activist involvement principles, we did remunerate people £50 a submission, which again is not is not the way that journals. Well, now you have to pay to put money in some journals, but submissions to some journals. So we do reward people. Part of the way we reward people is financially, and we did agree.
And this, very importantly, was funded by the British Association of Social Workers.
Yeah, BAS was funding, yeah. And that proved to be problematic in terms of, and in the end, for example, we created a template to make it easier for people to put an invoice in. It sounds, to those of us who put invoices in regularly, it's not a big deal. But to other people, and even things like asking for their bank details, particularly in the world of scams and rip-offs, you know, the anxiety of people, oh, I've got somebody I don't know from a university asking me for my bank details. Is this bona fide? So being aware of what might be for an academic or a practitioner, normal day-to-day, you need to understand and be patient and kind with people who you have to keep going back to and saying, well, look, you're missing a sort code, or that detailed stuff. It was a bit was difficult, but it's the first time, and you know, the various financial systems have to deal with that, and I'm sure. Well, we will learn. I've already said to Baswa that the time-consuming element of that, we need to make that smoother for everybody, editors and people putting claims in themselves. But we did think it was important to stick to that principle, and it has worked, but it's been perhaps a bit more difficult. And things like signing a license agreement. Those of us who submit to journals, we know what it means, but somebody else, hang on a minute, I've been asked to sign something here. And people, of course, who are digitally rather excluded. And, you know, could I be sent it by post? And could you do? We tried to be as flexible as we could. But some of those logistical lessons, shall we say, which aren't particularly to do with social work, but to ease. It's a holistic effort. You know, we had great support from the journal, from BASWA, from each other, but we will learn from this. And if we do it again, which I hope we will, and we'll make it more a more normal part of the journal, the system should make the pathways for authors and for ourselves smoother.
Thank you, Mel.
Yeah, and actually Peter came to it as well. I was going to mention that whole thing about things like the license agreements. What we all found ourselves being were like the buffer between the contributors and making that a really inclusive process, and the system that was really preventing it from being inclusive. And it worked really well, I think, in the whole development of papers and the extra support we provided. We met with some contributors or had additional kind of exchanges around development. And Penny in the BJSW office was also a fantastic buffer in trying to really support people with signing license agreements and doing those processes. But it was really difficult and really daunting for people, and we really need to be changing those systems to make that more inclusive.
Omar.
I think something else that surprised me, which I think links in well with Mel and Peter, is I think for me as an activist, and I think maybe we'd all call ourselves activists, I think we've all been in situations, I'm sure every activist has been in a situation where you want to be radical, you want to see change, you want to see things move forward meaningfully. And I think in a lot of spaces that becomes really difficult. And I don't want to say that it wasn't difficult, you know, in terms of, in our work, you know, there was lots of work involved, but it also was welcomed. And I think when radical change is welcomed, it all felt really possible, it felt achievable. And I think we're all able to make some change, you know, to make things better for people with lived experience, because there was that kind of bottom up and kind of grassroots, but also the kind of top down approach as well. You know, everyone's on that same goal, and I think that's really, really important. And you know, I almost want to say, you know, if we keep reflecting on it as such, you know, if that's the process, radical change can be a lot easier and a lot less scary than we think.
And if it's owned and shared with everyone, I think that kind of having a joint responsibility to hold that space and support that process and to listen to feedback needs to rest with all of us. Yeah. So thinking about the key lessons, and we've already touched on quite a few, for social work publishing, it sounds that we really need to rethink about how we communicate about different outcomes, from, yes, please, could you address these few issues, and then it's going to be ready to publication, congratulations, we're ready to accept, to this work isn't ready, but these are the suggestions we have for what you can possibly do with your work. Better systems to remunerate people for their time, and availability of resources, both in terms of your time and the input you committed to this type of work, to actual funding for people's time, and then processes to remunerate people need to be firmer. The quality, definitions of quality maybe need to be revisited for the journals. What else should publishing, social work publishing, learn? Peter.
Yeah, I think you've started to list it. My feeling is that once you try and make this change, you have to change everything.
Yeah.
Everything. We never realized when we started. I mean, you might have had those feelings from the past of getting some rude and horrible response from a reviewer yourself, but you don't think about it systemically. And I think what it's actually telling us is something quite enormous about our society, just how many people routinely get left out of most things. It isn't just about social work. It isn't just about politics. It isn't just about responding to bad policy. It's about so much that people are encouraged right from going to school to as it were, know a place, to know your place. And also, I think increasingly in recent years, when we've been set so much by ideology and politics against each other, to clutch at them being okay and being able to have bad feelings about many other people. And then there's the counterblast of things like this, which are really saying absolutely the opposite. But, you know, it's right what both Mel and Peter have said, which is that when you have to re-enter the real world, the world of banks, etc., then you come up against all those sorts of taken for granted obstacles, which I think for many people are quite big and getting bigger more and more. So I think that's why this is actually so important. This is one of my most enjoyable experiences of involvement, where it's not just people as service users trying to get involved and break down the door, but of doing it together. And because it's so advanced, you see more difficulties, and you also can overcome more difficulties. And it's exciting, but it reminds me that it is a whole world issue in every sense. It's not just about rich and poor countries and rich and poor people. It's about the way in which so many people, and we see it most clearly in relation, I think, to the way that disabled people in relation to communication and environment and the rest are kept out. But it's much more than that. And that's what we're challenging. And what's great is that we will keep challenging it, and it will have a structural bearing. And I think it's not surprising that something like the BJSW has taken it as far as it has on this occasion, because social work has had, I've seen it for years, and the social work's got increasingly into trouble over the years for being all the things that are despised, which then gradually we see becoming mainstream, not least this whole issue of diversity. So we have really uncorked the genie, but as I've said before, the genie ain't going to go back.
Good. That's so good to hear. Leah.
Amen to that. I think one really important message to take away from our effort is that being led by the voice of lived experience in an academic journal is not just a matter of ideology. We all share values, but we didn't do this because we think only because we think it's the right thing to do, right? In terms of values or ideology, it is a necessary step to take if you want to know more, right? If you want to improve and develop a better, more effective social work. And I hope that some of the bridges that we've tried to build towards this understanding will go through once the issue is published, that people will read it. And I hope they will think, I can't believe I didn't know this. I can't believe in all my years of education or reading this or reading that, I never realized that this is how some people experience A or B or C. Or and I hope that itself will generate some sort of shaking up of everything that will also perhaps I don't know, bring people less open to this sort of idea closer to what we've been trying to say. So hopefully that will happen.
Frank.
I wanted to say that I think we're doing something quite subversive. We're turning the paradigm of the researcher and the researched, the narrator and the narrated on its head a bit. If not too explicitly, at least I think there's a message there that for the readers of the journal. And talking of surprises, I want to be pleasantly surprised when we learn the reaction of the readers to this. Will they feel uncomfortable, or will they feel really surprised, pleasantly surprised with what has been done, and what effect will it have on their work? So I think it would be really good if we could get some sort of reader feedback about this whole venture. I don't know how you'd do that, but maybe a little. Yeah.
Well, we are present on social media. This video is going to be published on the BASWA YouTube channel, so there is commenting facilities there. The journal itself has editorial office email, which is available on the website. So this is an invitation for people to get in touch. And also we are on social media, particularly on Twitter, where we would really love to hear, and we will ensure that people are able to, and that we promote all these ways of communicating to us, because we want to learn from this and embed it within the everyday work of the journal, which also now half of our editorial board are people with lived experience. And that has been a very important part of our work, that we make sure that all this work is embedded, that it's not a one-off event, but something that we really foreground going forward.
Right.
I could talk to all of you for hours, but we'll have to wrap up this recording. And I just want us to conclude with each one of you reflecting briefly about what is next for Voice and Influence of Lived Experience, whether in publishing, in knowledge production, for social work, and for all the services that people rely upon for support, for social work learning and practice. So Mel, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, there is so much I want to say in answer to that question, but the point I think I'll make is, as a participatory researcher, I always talk about how change starts to happen as soon as you ask the first question. And actually, that's what we've experienced here. It isn't about sort of the recommendations that come at the end of a process. As soon as we put this on the table, started this collective, started having these conversations, change started to happen individually, collectively at the journal. And that's what I want to continue. So there are lots of specific things. I would love there to be a section in the journal. I'd love other kind of journals to carry on where we've left off. But mainly for me, the way to doing that is that we keep this conversation going, and then change will keep happening.
Wonderful, thank you. Peter Beresford.
Our focus has been on lived experience, which I think has been absolutely right. And we focused on the lived experience of people on the receiving end of social work. I think there are many issues of division and alienation in our society these days. And I think many of us, not just people as service users, are alienated from our lived experience. And I would like to see along the line, and I'm not saying it's got the same, it's the same issue, or you should be talking about other people's lived experience, your own lived experience as a group, as a constituency, but remembering the importance of intersectionality. I'd like to see more about people as practitioners and researchers being able to upfront their lived experience and to reconcile it with what they do occupationally, professionally, because I think the divisions that exist sometimes between those two, our lived experience and what we're expected to do, are reasons why we can be quite oppressive in our world. So let's value, which research hasn't done historically, lived experience, but begin to look in different ways at different people's lived experience and intersectionality in relation to lived experience.
Thank you. Omar.
Yeah, I think linking into both Mel and Peter, there are so many more voices that need to be heard. And I think one of the key takeaways for me is that radical change is possible. When you have that collective of activists wanting to collaborate, ready to make that meaningful change, it's needed. And I want to see that continued. I want to see kind of the promotion of the diversity and inclusion of people with lived experience. And I can see that this is a start. And for that to continue to happen is I think, yeah, the biggest thing.
Thank you. Leah.
I think the main challenge now will be to make sure that this is a movement and not an anecdote. And what I would like to see is, to see some of the basic elements of what we did become the standard. That is what I would hope for.
Excellent. And for those standards to flourish and develop even further.
Yeah.
Thank you. Peter.
Yes, all my work is driven by co-production, and that old adage, nothing about us without us, is always at the forefront of my work. And this experience has revealed the depths of knowledge and insight, and come up with perspectives that I had never even thought of in the world I've worked for 40 plus years. So I acknowledge that internationally we have similar issues. I acknowledge that user involvement, particularly in practice, more than academia, is marginalised. And the more we can get platforms like this to promote the excellence, the richness, the equal knowledge of with lived experience, the better. And I very much look forward to playing future parts in further special issues.
Thank you so much. Last but not least, Frank.
Yes, I agree with Peter. It's really important, I think, to acknowledge that the cat's out of the bag and you can't put it back in. But there are other bags. There are other bags out there that the cats might like to play in, and one would hope that this journal would actually be seen as a pathbreaker other journals, other people who are in this whole area get involved in this kind of thing, so that it becomes more normal, if I can use that expression, for people with lived and living experience to actually see themselves published in a range of journals, not just this one-off special. Congratulations to the British Journal, but I hope it's not the only one that does this.
Absolutely. And I really hope that people do engage with this conversation, because it's so important. And I think I speak on behalf of all of us that we are open for any questions anyone might have, whether it's from other social work journals, whether it's from other organizations wishing to create such a space, that we keep this conversation going, that it's not a one-off issue, that it's not one-off conversation, but just and it isn't the first conversation of this nature. It's that we are taking along this path, and we really hope that more knowledge and practice is done together in a very open and more kinder and inclusive way. I thank you all so much for your such hard work over the past, is it 15 months we've been doing this? 15 months that it took to get to the special issue. It comes out in May 2023, and please do let us know what you make of it. I wish to thank all of the Editorial Collective. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and I could talk to you 2 hours. Thank you so much for staying with us.
Thanks, Ria.